Hey everybody, John Reardon here for Nintendo World Report TV, and we are going to take a very quick look at Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4 for Switch 1 and Switch 2. Now you may have already seen our review go up for the Switch 2 version. We didn't get the Switch 1 version until after that review had gone out, so I figured it was worth making a separate video to sort of look at both of those, see the differences between them. This is also just an interesting game to look at from that sort of cross-generational Nintendo perspective, because if you didn't know, the original Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 released on the GameCube, but it also released on the Nintendo 64. It was actually the final licensed N64 game to ever be released. So this is a game that every time it's released for a Nintendo system has been cross-generational, so just an interesting perspective to have on it. Let's start with the basic metrics. The Switch 2 runs docked at 1080p, which is then upscaled presumably via the system's integrated DLSS implementation. Getting a resolution count on handheld I had a bit more trouble with. I'm guessing that it's running at an underlying resolution of about 720p, which then once again is being upscaled via DLSS. Game winds up looking pretty good. Now and then in quick motion, as with any DLSS implementation, you can see some sort of artifacting around the edges of objects, but it is significantly cleaner than, say, temporal anti-aliasing. And if you need an example of that, well, we can just look at the Switch 1 version, which is indeed using temporal anti-aliasing because, of course, we're not doing DLSS on Switch 1. Switch 1 docked runs at an underlying resolution of 900p, which honestly is pretty good. Once again, because of the anti-aliasing, I did have trouble counting a resolution for handheld mode. I am guessing we're between 540 and 720. And of course, the Switch 1 drops down from 60 frames per second to 30. I will say, when you're just sort of looking at screenshots of the Switch 1 as compared to Switch 2, I was impressed actually how close they look. There are obviously differences, but I think the Switch 1 port actually deserves some credit for holding up very well against the Switch 2 version. Where we do see differences is in a lot of small incidental details. That might be the tracks left behind by skateboards on the ground, it can be bits of trash, essentially anywhere that you would see a decal on the ground. There also have been some bits of geometry reduced. In the college level, I think this is the easiest to see. You can see that these overhanging flags are just sort of like the actual string on the Switch 1, whereas on Switch 2 you have those little hanging flags. We can also see, if we look farther out into the distance, that some of the background buildings have actually been removed in the Switch 1 version, and some of the other buildings have been simplified, sort of elements taken off the top of them and things like that. Some of the other differences we see is a lowering of resolution for baked lighting, screen space reflections being replaced with cube maps, and a lowering of general texture detail. But I still think that a lot of the core visual identity is preserved pretty well. There was actually one area when I was playing the Switch 2 version prior to launch, in the Foundry level, there's these sort of windows along the back wall into another room. And when I saw those initially, I figured, hey, that's an easy area for geometry to be cut in the Switch 1 version, but that's not the case. To get these comparisons, we actually did what we're calling dead man runs, where we just sort of let a run start and we don't touch the controller, and that allows us to get literally perfect like-for-like gameplay between both versions of the game. We did try this for the GameCube version as well, but just differences in physics and, slight differences in level geometry caused it to not always sync up perfectly, but we did have a few spots where things did line up pretty well, allowing us to get some comparisons. Obviously, it's a pretty night and day difference, but it is really cool to see what a great job the team did preserving a lot of the identity of the original version. And yes, we did also try this with the N64 version, but there's a lot more geometric and physics differences in that version, so it did not work at all in that version. But even without perfect like-for-like footage, it is fascinating to see this game across 4 different Nintendo home consoles, and that's not even including previous handheld ports. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 is weirdly a game that has existed on a lot of Nintendo systems. And so we sort of get this interesting evolution of graphics by looking at the various versions of this game. If you are curious about the Switch 2 version, you can check out Neil Ronahan's full review, but I think in general it's a very good version of this game, outside of some stability issues that he highlights in that review. As for the Switch 1 version, I do think that it is a very solid port, and I wouldn't say you should avoid the game just because you haven't upgraded to the Switch 2 yet and you don't have something else to play it on. I think the Switch 1 version does a really great job of delivering this game, and it's a very comparable experience to what we got in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2 Remastered. So while obviously the Switch 2 version is better, I think you're still getting a great experience on Switch 1. But that's all I have for this quick look. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, and consider subscribing to Nintendo World Report TV. You can also check out NintendoWorldReport.com for a whole lot more, and if you have any questions about the game, feel free to reach out to us on our Discord using the link in the description. My name's John Raridan, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. This video was made possible by our generous supporters on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/NWR for all the details.